Spring of 2018 marked my last semester in high school. I'll be honest, it wasn't a time I took seriously. I didn't care about my grades, and I often skipped class with a couple of friends. If I remember correctly, it was a Friday when this terrifying incident unfolded. I had once again made plans to skip one of my classes, this time with my two closest friends, Aaron and Asher. Our plan was simple: meet up behind the school, take a secluded trail, and walk to the nearby McDonald's. The school always had administrators and security guards stationed outside, so to avoid them, we planned to cut through a nature trail that wound its way through the dense forest behind the school. It was a longer route, but it felt safer than risking getting caught. We started down the trail, joking and laughing like we always did. But not even 5 minutes in, we spotted someone up ahead. It was a kid I'd never seen before. At first, I thought it was no deal, probably just another student skipping like us. But as we got closer, something about him felt wrong. The kid was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, both filthy. His clothes were stained with green and brown smears, especially around the knees, as if he'd been crawling through the dirt. His hair was matted with leaves and grime, giving him a wild, disheveled appearance. Asher squinted and then whispered, "Hey, I think that's one of the freshmen." When we got close enough, Asher called out to him. The kid turned to face us, and I immediately noticed how out of breath he was. His eyes darted nervously between me and Aaron. He looked like he was trying to figure out if we were a threat. Asher, always the friendly one, asked casually, "What are you doing out here, man? And what's with your clothes?" The kid paused, glancing around like he was trying to make sure no one else was listening. Then, in a shaky voice, he said, "I'm skipping the whole day." His answer didn't explain the state he was in. Aaron, trying to lighten the mood, laughed and said, "Looks like you've been camping out here or something." We chuckled nervously. All of us, except the kid. He didn't even crack a smile. Instead, his expression darkened, and he started scanning the trees around us. Then, in a low, almost conspiratorial tone, he asked, "Do you guys want to see something?" None of us answered right away. The way he said it made my stomach turn, but curiosity got the better of us. We hesitantly nodded. What he did next will haunt me forever. He reached down, lifted his shirt, and revealed a handgun tucked into his waistband. We froze. For a moment, it felt like the entire forest went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Aaron broke the silence. "Dude, what the hell? Where did you get that?" The kid pointed back down the trail, his hand trembling. "Found it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Asher, trying to stay calm, said, "You should probably get rid of that thing, man. Seriously." But the kid shook his head, his gaze hardening. "You don't get it. I'm already in so much trouble." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. His tone wasn't just scared, it was angry, desperate, and unhinged. Without saying another word, the three of us exchanged looks. We didn't need to talk. We all knew what we had to do. We turned and bolted, sprinting off the trail and into the forest. Branches scratched at our faces and thorns tore at our clothes, but we didn't stop. The sound of our footsteps crashing through the underbrush drowned out everything else. We didn't slow down until we burst out of the woods and into the school parking lot. What we saw there made my blood run cold. Police cars were everywhere, their lights flashing violently against the growing darkness. Officers were shouting orders, their voices echoing off the school's walls. We stood there, panting and terrified, trying to make sense of what was happening. In the chaos, none of us spoke. Without a word, we each turned and ran, this time straight home. Later that evening, the full story came out. The kid was a freshman, and he really had been skipping all day. But what we didn't know was that he had stolen the gun from a car parked in a nearby lot. Even worse, he'd posted a threat online targeting the school. The post, as I later heard, was graphic and disturbing. It detailed his plans to make everyone pay. Some students saw it and reported it to the school, triggering an immediate lockdown. The police arrived quickly and found the kid as he was leaving the trail, heading back toward the school. He was arrested before he could act on his threats. Rumors spread afterward. People said he hadn't been taking his medication for over a week. Others said he was dealing with bullying or had a history of violence. I don't know what's true, and honestly, I don't care. What haunts me most is the thought of how close we were to disaster. If we hadn't distracted him, even for a few minutes, would the school have had enough time to react? Would lives have been lost? To this day, I can still see his face, the way his hands trembled, and the cold look in his eyes. It's a memory I wish I could forget, but I can't, and I don't think I ever will. This happened so long ago that many of the details are blurry. It wasn't yesterday, it was 17 years ago, but the memories of that day still haunt me. I'll try my best to recount everything as clearly as I can. It was the last day of school. I was in the 4th grade. Back then, 4th graders had to be picked up by their parents, while 5th graders were allowed to walk home alone. My mom always picked me up on the last day of school, and this year was no different. That day, my best friend Noah and I had planned a play date to celebrate. Even though Noah wasn't in my class that year, we'd been friends since kindergarten, and we were both excited. Noah was dismissed from a different hallway, so after the final bell rang, I lined up with my class and waited at the exit door with my teacher, Miss Blue. As parents shuffled in and out of the parking lot, I scanned the crowd, waiting to see Noah's dad. Instead, a man called my name. Luke. Luke. I turned and saw a man waving at me as he approached. He smiled and said, "Hey, I'm Noah's uncle. I'm here to pick you up." Noah's dad got held up at work. I hesitated, but he seemed confident, even friendly. He walked me over to Miss Blue, who was overseeing our dismissal. I told her, "I'm being picked up by Noah's uncle." The man waved at her with a smile, and without much questioning, she nodded and dismissed me. As we walked through the parking lot, I noticed the man was jittery. He spoke quickly, with a slight stutter, and walked so fast I struggled to keep up with my backpack weighing me down. He explained that Noah's dad was unexpectedly stuck at work, so he was driving me back to their house. We reached his car, a dark red hatchback, and that's when I finally realized something felt off. "Where's Noah?" I asked, hesitating as I climbed into the back seat. The man turned to me with a strange smile. "Oh, Noah's already at the house," he said. That didn't make sense. Why wasn't he with us? The drive felt like forever. He kept talking, asking questions about school, sports, and my favorite classes. But I wasn't really listening. My mind was racing. I'd lived in this town my whole life, and yet none of the streets looked familiar. When we finally stopped, the house seemed normal enough from the outside. But as soon as I stepped inside, a wave of dread washed over me. The place was dark. Every curtain was drawn, and the only light came from a dim lamp in the corner of the room. The air felt thick, heavy, and wrong. "Where's Noah?" I asked again, my voice trembling. The man's demeanor shifted. He started stammering and scratching his neck nervously. He's downstairs, playing video games. Just wait here, okay?" He disappeared into another room, and I heard a door creak open, followed by footsteps descending into what I assumed was the basement. That's when I knew I was in danger. I ran to the front door and tried to open it, but it was locked, dead-bolted from the inside. My heart pounded as panic set in. I couldn't breathe. I glanced back, half expecting him to be standing behind me, but the room was empty. I forced myself to think. There had to be a phone somewhere. I darted into the kitchen and spotted an old landline hanging on the wall. My hands shook as I picked it up and dialed 911. Please help me," I whispered. "I've been kidnapped. Please come to this house." The operator responded calmly, assuring me they were sending help. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't risk him hearing me. I hid the phone under a towel on the counter and ran back to the living room, just as I heard his footsteps coming back up the basement stairs. He called my name. "Luke, come down here. Noah's waiting for you." I didn't answer. The footsteps grew louder until he appeared in the doorway. His face had changed. The fake smile was gone, replaced by something cold and menacing. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer. I stammered, I want to leave." His expression darkened. "You're not going anywhere." Before I could react, he lunged forward, grabbing my wrist in a tight, painful grip. I screamed, but he yanked me toward the basement door, dragging me down the stairs. The basement was cold, damp, and unfinished. The floor was bare concrete, and a single dim bulb hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows. A thick wooden support beam stood in the middle of the room like a grim centerpiece. He locked the door behind us and muttered something under his breath before storming back upstairs, leaving me alone. I sat there in the suffocating silence, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Then I heard it. The doorbell. It rang 3 times, followed by loud, urgent banging. My stomach flipped. The police. It had to be the police. The banging grew louder, more insistent, but I didn't hear his footsteps moving toward the door. Instead, I heard him pacing upstairs, muttering to himself. Then came the sound of splintering wood. A loud crash echoed through the house, followed by heavy footsteps and shouting voices. I ran to the top of the basement stairs, pounding on the door and screaming for help. Moments later, the door burst open and a police officer grabbed me, pulling me into the safety of his arms. Outside, I saw flashing lights and officers swarming the property. The man was dragged out of the house in handcuffs, his face twisted with anger and defeat. When my parents arrived, my mom collapsed into tears, holding me so tightly I thought I might break. I learned later that the man was a work acquaintance of Noah's dad. He'd somehow found out about our plans and used the opportunity to lure me away. To this day, I don't know how he recognized me, but I try not to dwell on it. The thought of what might have happened if I hadn't called 911 chills me to the core. 17 years later, I still don't know if that man is out of prison. And honestly, I don't want to find out. This happened a few years ago when I was in high school. I don't remember exactly what grade I was in, but that part doesn't really matter. What matters is what happened on that day. A day I'll never forget. It was nearing the end of the semester. A few friends and I had planned to ditch class to play basketball. Near the edge of our school's property, just before the forest began, there was a full basketball court. I don't know if the school owned it, but it was where we spent most of our time whenever we skipped class. The court was visible from the school building, but surprisingly, no one ever seemed to care. I think I only got in trouble once for it, and even then, it wasn't a big deal. There were 4 of us that day, playing a casual 2-on-2 game. We just started when a group of 4 or 5 college-aged guys started walking toward us. At first, we didn't pay them much attention, but when they got close, they stopped abruptly, looking surprised. "Oh, sorry," one of them said. "We thought you were someone else." It was a little weird, but they didn't seem threatening, so we just shrugged it off and told them it was fine. After that, they turned and walked directly into the forest. That part struck me as strange. Why were they going into the woods? Still, they didn't seem suspicious enough for us to dwell on it, so we continued our game. That's when things took a terrifying turn. We were wrapping up our game when the most horrifying, blood-curdling scream shattered the quiet air. We all froze, our heads snapping toward the forest. For a second, none of us moved. Then, acting on pure instinct, a couple of us, myself included, ran just slightly into the forest to see what was going on. What we saw still haunts me. Clear as day, we saw 2 huge men in ski masks attacking the college kids we'd just spoken to, using baseball bats. The sound of those bats connecting with flesh made my stomach churn. One of the masked men suddenly looked up. His eyes locked on us, cold and piercing, even from a distance. My heart stopped. "Run!" someone shouted, snapping us out of our paralysis. We bolted, adrenaline coursing through our veins as we sprinted back to the school. My chest burned, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but fear kept me going. I didn't dare look back. When we got inside, we didn't say a word to anyone. We didn't report it, didn't tell a teacher, nothing. Instead, we split up and slunk back into our respective classes, making up excuses about why we'd been gone. The guilt still eats at me. Somehow, the school found out about the incident. Not long after we got back inside, the principal announced a full lockdown over the intercom. The doors were locked, the lights were turned off, and everyone was told to stay quiet. The lockdown lasted for what felt like hours, though nothing seemed to come of it. By the time it was over, rumors had already started swirling. Over the next few days, we pieced together what had happened. Apparently, it had been a drug deal gone wrong. The college kids we'd seen were involved, and 2 of them were sent to the hospital with serious injuries. But the men in the ski masks? They were never caught. They vanished into the woods that day, and no one, not the police, not the school, ever identified them. Even now, I can't stop thinking about how close we were to being in their place. If those guys had misidentified us, it could have been us lying on the ground, beaten and bleeding. The image of that man in the ski mask staring at us still wakes me up at night. His eyes weren't just cold, they were full of malice. For the rest of the semester, the incident was all anyone could talk about. But for me, it was more than just a scary story. It was a reminder of how quickly things can go horribly wrong and how lucky or unlucky you can be in the blink of an eye. Even now, the thought of going near that forest sends a chill down my spine.